In 2022, the world continued its recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, with the worst of the virus seemingly put behind us. While new infections and deaths continue to occur, vaccination rates have been very high, which has enabled the world to live with the virus without having to go through more economically crushing lockdowns. However, hopes of a smooth economic recovery globally were torpedoed by rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine, as Russia's President Vladimir Putin sought to cripple Ukraine's ambitions to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. This culminated in the invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, a war that is still raging. The conflict has pitched the West against Russia, and the West has gone all in, giving Ukraine as much military aid as it can while slapping Moscow with the heaviest sanction regime ever seen. The ripple effects of that war have come to define most of 2022, from the prices of crude oil and grains spiking to gas shortages in Europe, especially as it enters a potentially harsh winter. The war has also caused a flood of refugees from Ukraine into Europe, as well as forced European countries to confront their energy dependence on Moscow. As the year ends, the war grinds on, much to the chagrin of Moscow, which had planned for a swift victory and has had to endure embarrassing setbacks on the battlefields lately. The world also continued to suffer from the effects of climate change, with record rainfall which caused flooding in numerous countries such as Pakistan and Nigeria. This is also as the annual climate summit, the Conference of Parties or COP27, finally agreed to set up a fund for poorer countries that are disproportionately suffering the effects of climate change despite being the least polluters.
Well, army officers in Burkina Faso have announced the overthrow of military leader Paul-Henri Damiba.
In Africa, the erosion of democracy continued in many countries, such as Burkina Faso, which saw two successful coups, Chad and Mali, which announced transition programs that could well see the current junta leaders transmute from military to civilian rule, and Sudan, which continues to see protests crushed by the current military regime. Meanwhile, the civil war in Ethiopia had a ceasefire agreement that was violated before finally reaching a peace deal on the second anniversary of the war's start. As Nigeria approaches the 2023 elections, governance has effectively stopped, and 2022 was filled with pre-election activities as candidates vied for their party's tickets. Primaries in this election season have been less rancorous compared to previous elections, largely due to a new electoral act, which was finally signed into law by President Buhari early in the year. This election will, however, take place under the cloud of worsening economic conditions and heightening insecurity, with attacks such as March's attack on the Kaduna-Abuja train being a seminal moment. At the end of every year, SBM makes projections of what we think will take place in Nigeria during the coming year. While the prophecy business is not an exact science, our record so far has been a good one. At 53% correct, our 2022 predictions were our worst ever performance. Of the 38 forecasts we made, 20 were correct, 9 partially correct, and 9 wrong. 2022 has been a challenging year for most of the world due to mostly man-made reasons, despite the hope that the world will move forward without the COVID-19 virus holding it back. How will 2023 play out? We will wait to see. The year ahead, our 2023 predictions for Nigeria. Political. We expect that despite the security situation in the country, the elections will hold. We expect that while it will be challenged, the Independent National Electoral Commission will insist on and ensure that the new BVAS machines and electronic transmission are used in the 2023 elections. For the first time in Nigeria's political history at the presidential level, we have a third candidate capable of taking a significant number of votes away from the two leading candidates, and this will happen. We foresee a situation where the candidate that wins the most number of states does not win the most votes, and as a result, we will end up with a runoff election for the first time in Nigeria's history. We believe the elections will result in a significant shift as the ruling All Progressives Congress will be the biggest loser at the gubernatorial level. We foresee the People's Democratic Party sweeping most governorship seats in the North Central, Southeast, and South-South, while Abia State should go to a third-party candidate. However, the APC should remain dominant in the Southwest while splitting the states in the Northeast and Northwest with the PDP. For the first time in Nigerian history, we believe that the National Assembly will be dominated by a party different from that of the president. A poor performance in the presidential elections will sound the death knell of the APC, as the conditions under which the party came together and has remained a party over the last 8 years will no longer exist. The APC's fractionalization will lead to a legislative gridlock regardless of who is president. Security. The aftermath of the 2023 elections will see elevated political violence as dissatisfied elements will fan the embers of discord, leading to clashes between support groups. The fratricidal conflict between the JAS and ISWAP factions of the insurgency in the Northeast will lead to more frequent clashes, most of which will be in JAS strongholds. Security in Lagos will come under immense strain. The likely re-election of Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu will empower more thuggery, and the potential loss of Bola Tinubu at the presidential elections will lead to more tensions between state-affiliated thugs and minorities. The pastoral conflict is likely to flare up again in the North Central. Relative peace will return to the southeast as the population turns more and more against IPOB's Eastern Security Network, but the region's highways will continue to bear the brunt of the security challenges. Economy. We expect that the Central Bank of Nigeria will keep interest rates high for most of the year, hampering much-needed lending to the private sector and contributing to even slower economic growth. Economic growth will fall to negative 2% in the year. Inflation will remain elevated, primarily driven by food inflation and FX illiquidity. The CBN's stance on FX will become an even greater issue post-election, as sections of the country that have been less vocal during the Buhari years will become re-energized to demand more from whoever succeeds Buhari. We expect Buhari's successor to take quick advantage of the new administration's winning momentum to reverse some of the president's more unpopular economic policies, especially those contributing to the high food prices. The future of petrol subsidies depends on who becomes president. However, we are more likely to see partial subsidy removal than complete deregulation in 2023. The Naira will also likely be devalued to ease the pressure on FX. However, we do not envisage a full float of the Naira. Nigeria will continue to struggle to meet oil production quotas, and revenue from oil will continue to perform poorly due to infrastructure issues. We expect taxes, especially value-added tax VAT, to rise, and the VAT rate will likely be increased to around 10% in 2023. Nigeria will find the funding to meet its Eurobond obligations, likely from asset sales, as it is unlikely to be able to refinance the bonds at reasonable rates in 2023. Africa. The build-up to Ghana's 2024 elections that will commence in 2023 will see the economy as the central discussion topic. A third force will likely emerge in Ghana, as it did in Nigeria. The war in Ukraine will not go away anytime soon, and ultimately food shortages occasioned by that war will cause increased social unrest across the continent, starting with countries in North Africa. The Sahel's terror challenges will reach more coastal states. Attacks so far confined to the northern regions of most coastal West African countries will begin to reach down to the central parts of these countries. French involvement in Francophone Africa will dwindle even more as more people in the region show increased animosity. Still, the French will focus more resources on Niger and Chad and will come into increased geopolitical competition with Russia in both countries. The Great Lakes will witness better security than in 2022 as Kenya and Uganda begin to assert themselves and deploy more troops to conflict-affected areas alongside Rwanda. Civil society in Tunisia will completely capitulate to the current regime, and Kais Said's rule will be strengthened. President Cyril Ramaphosa's approval ratings will continue to plummet as South Africa's economic woes worsen. This will put the African National Congress in a weak position ahead of the 2024 polls. However, the Democratic Alliance will most likely not capitalize on that. Coup contagion will drive more coup attempts in West and Central Africa. We expect at least half of these attempts to succeed.